I thought my oldest Pokemon were dead. I started playing Pokemon with Ruby version, obtained alongside a Game Boy Advance SP on my 9th birthday in 2003. Over the course of the next few years, I would also get Leaf Green and Emerald when they came out, along with Fire Red and Sapphire at some point within that span. I still have all the original cartridges, as evidenced by Michael Growth written on the back of them with varying degrees of fadedness, done by my mother to keep my brother and I from arguing over which cartridge belonged to whom. But while the cartridges are still here, the original save files are not. Ruby has a save file I started a couple years ago when I bought a Game Boy Advance SP to replace my original one that I foolishly sold as a young teenager. Whatever was on that Ruby file wasn't significant, so I just wiped it to start a new one. Sapphire has a completed file from a character named Brendan, but I don't know when I completed it. Both Fire Red and Leaf Green have files with only 3 badges, with characters named Ash and Andre, neither of which I remember playing myself. Finally, Emerald had a save file with 8 badges right before the Victory Road, and I don't remember when I played it, but I would assume when I was older because I had a Salamence, something I doubt I would do as a little kid. In short, the save files of my first playthroughs of these games are long gone. The only Pokemon preserved from these games was my first ever Shiny, a Fearow I aptly named Shiny that safely resides in Pokemon Home. All of my other original Gen 3 Pokemon were lost. Or so I thought. Greetings, Poke fans, Michael here, and this is the story of how I discovered a treasure trove of some of my oldest Pokemon, and the resulting quest to discover their origins. This all started because recently I set up my GameCube and Wii U on a spare TV in my house. I wanted to play some Mario Kart Double Dash to see if my skills in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe would transfer to the first Mario Kart I ever had. They don't. Double Dash is hard. But then one day as I was poking around my backlog of games, one in particular caught my eye. Pokemon Box, Ruby, and Sapphire. You all are likely already familiar with Pokemon Home, the modern Pokemon storage game, which is really more of a utility software. It can hold on to Pokemon from every generation except the Gen 1 and 2 cartridges, and can be used to move Pokemon from previous systems onto the Switch, then from one Switch game to another. Its predecessor was Pokemon Bank, a 3DS software that served the same purpose. It is still used to move Pokemon from the 3DS to Pokemon Home, but you had to have downloaded it before the 3DS eShop shut down earlier this year. If you didn't do that, well, you still can, but you'll have to drink up me hearties yo-ho if you catch my drift. Home and Bank are probably the most well-known Pokemon storage softwares now, but there were some that came before. Prior to Bank was My Pokemon Ranch for the Wii, a goofier one that involved putting your Pokemon into chibi model form and letting them run around a ranch with a Mii caretaker. I actually had this one, but it had issues. The biggest one is that Pokemon can only be withdrawn from the ranch by using the same save file as the one that put them on there originally. So since I don't have my original Diamond save file anymore, I assumed those Pokemon were all lost. I now know I could have gotten them off by using less than authorized methods, but prior to learning that, I thought they were gone forever, so I donated the Wii to an old folks home. So it's a bummer I'll never get those Pokemon back, but at least the seniors get to do more bowling. But before even My Pokemon Ranch was Pokemon Box, Ruby, and Sapphire. It has an adventure mode where you can play your Ruby or Sapphire game on the TV screen using the GameCube controller, but its main purpose is storage. Despite its name, it can interact with and store Pokemon from all 5 Gen 3 handheld games, and it has a capacity for 1,500 Pokemon, which, might I say, is comically absurd. That's 1,500 Pokemon. The Ruby Sapphire Hoendex is only a little over 200, and the game itself can hold 420 Pokemon, nice, plus the 6 in your party. 1,500 plus 426 is 1,926 Pokemon. That's like catching every Pokemon in the Hoendex 10 times. Why? It becomes more reasonable when you know that it can store Pokemon from the other Gen 3 games too, but it came out before those games did. Anyways, I wanted to see if I had any Pokemon left on Box, because I hadn't opened it in a really long time. I had no idea what was on there, and the idea of finding some really old Pokemon of mine excited me. I plugged in my Ruby Sapphire style GameCube memory card that came with Pokemon Box, then booted it up. I was greeted with Box's remix of the Ruby Sapphire title theme, which slaps. Then click Go to Pokemon Box. I'm then prompted to connect a Game Boy Advance with a Pokemon cartridge to the GameCube using the GBA GameCube link cable. I think a big reason why I didn't look at Box in, gosh, I would estimate a decade and a half, is that I didn't have the hardware. As I mentioned, I sold my Game Boy Advance SP when I was an early teenager, and I didn't buy a new one until 2019. Then I didn't buy the connecting cable until early 2020 to make my The Longest Journey a Pokemon Can Take video. And I didn't look at Box during that process. And where I live now is my first time setting up my GameCube since I made that video 3 years ago. So I do as it instructs and turn on my Game Boy Advance, and after a bit of connecting, it tells me I have to save at a Pokemon Center. I'm guessing it's to prevent you from removing any Pokemon in your party that have HMs, and then end up trapping you in the field. If you're in a Pokemon Center, you can just get a different Pokemon from the box. So once I fix that and try it again, the box screen appears on the GBA, and it tells me that I can turn it off. Older games have their technical quirks, but it is wild to me that I could operate Pokemon Box with the Game Boy Advance just off. I'm greeted by Bridget, the older sister of Lynette, the PC developer in Hoenn. This is actually the same Bridget from Pokemon Bank just earlier in time, and this was the game that she was introduced in. My only options besides saving and exiting are of course arrange boxes, but then also showcase, a goofy mode where you can make little stages of Pokemon. It's pretty lame, to be honest. But of course what I really care about are what Pokemon are in the boxes. And it was a lot more than I expected. Boxes 1 through 3 were mostly full, but then box 4 had just some Pokemon, so I'd say around 3 boxes or 180 total. The first thing I noticed was that several Pokemon not available in Ruby and Sapphire were present, meaning that Pokemon from Fire Red, Leaf Green, and maybe Emerald were all on here. I didn't see any mythical event Pokemon yet, but that wasn't really surprising. Events back in Gen 3 required in-person attendance, which is something I didn't do. I was 10. Only 2 legendary Pokemon were present, an Articuno and a Suicune, and I found only 2 starters, a Venusaur and a Charizard, barely over their evolution levels, indicating that they were extra starters evolved for the Pokedex. I then began to scroll through the Pokemon, paying close attention to their OTs, original trainer, and ID numbers. Some were caught by Justin, the name of my younger brother. Others were caught by Lance, what I assume is an in-game name either Justin or I used in a not first playthrough of Ruby. I know it has to be Ruby since I found both Zangoose and Solrock, and those are Ruby exclusives. The OT of Alex also appeared, and it seemed to be the same thing. One of us played another playthrough as a girl, but in Sapphire version, since some of Alex's Pokemon were Lunatone and Seviper. There were a few standout Pokemon though. Pokemon where they had different OTs, and those OTs only appeared once. Mimey and the Mr. Mime from Rayleigh, Mr. Nido the Nidoran from Sage, Zinx the Jinx from Dante, and Chiding the Farfetch'd from Alyssa. I was confused at first, but then realized these are all Fire Red, Leaf Green in-game trade Pokemon, with Mr. Nido being Leaf Green specific. And that's when it hit me. It's not that just some of the Pokemon here were not from Ruby and Sapphire. Most of them were not from Ruby Sapphire. And a bunch of them all had the same original trainer name, Mike. That intrigued me, because I always name myself after myself in my first playthrough of a new game. It's varied between Michael, Mike, and Mikey over the years, but in my first playthrough of the game, it's always my own name. Another thing I noticed is that almost all of these Mike Pokemon had nicknames. I've gone through different phases with nicknaming over the course of my Pokemon career, and my current phase is I nickname Pokemon that I use, but not Pokemon I just catch for the dex. But when I started Pokemon back in Gen 3, I nicknamed basically every Pokemon I caught, and eventually stopped doing that because it got tedious, but in the earliest days, everything was nicknamed. So the OT of Mike and the fact that they all had nicknames made me realize that much of the Pokemon in this box could be from my first ever playthrough of Leaf Green, when the game came out almost 20 years ago. The possibility of this was super exciting, and I needed a way to confirm it. I wasn't sure at first, but then I remembered Shiny the Fearow. I still have a Pokemon from that original playthrough. So I opened up Shiny's info in Pokemon Home and saw it had the OT of Mike and the ID number of 14619. The Pokemon in this box file matched that exactly. I had found dozens of Pokemon from my first ever playthrough of Kanto. I couldn't believe it. I thought all those Pokemon except for Shiny the Fearow were gone. This was insanely cool to discover, but there was one Pokemon that made me a bit more emotional than the rest. Several Unknown were in the box, all with goofy names that included their letter in some way, such as Unknown A with the A in Michael capitalized. But one of them, Unknown D, was named Dado. My dad passed away in 2006 when I was 11 years old, and Dado is what I called him from birth up until not that long before he passed away, which means that I caught this Unknown and named it after him while he was still alive. And I think it's really special that I stumbled upon this Pokemon that honors his memory. Probably would have honored his memory a bit more if I had named like an Arcanine or a Dragonite after him, but I'm sure he'd still be flattered. Some other notable Pokemon from my original Leaf Green are a level 64 Parasect named Killer, a level 5 Beldum, not obtainable in Fire Red and Leaf Green, meaning I somehow got an egg over to it, and a level 5 Swablu named Cotton Ball, which knows False Swipe. This is not normally possible, but Box gives you gift eggs at certain deposited Pokemon milestones, and the first one is a Swablu with False Swipe, a move that it normally cannot learn. This one in particular must have been given at the start and seems to have been hatched in my Leaf Green. Additionally, I took a closer look at the Justin Pokemon, all of which had matching ID numbers, and there were 6 of them in total. Quagsire, Electabuzz, Cloyster, Arbok, Kangaskhan, and Psyduck. It occurred to me that every single one of these, except Kangaskhan, is a Fire Red exclusive. As you might imagine, when two brothers are playing Pokemon at the same time, I played one while he played the other. So I played Leaf Green, he played Fire Red. That leads me to believe that these Pokemon were caught in his Fire Red version, then traded to me so I could complete the Pokedex. There were some other Mike Pokemon that confused me though, because their ID numbers didn't match the others. This was the case for an Ampharos named Thundro, a Miltank caught in a Master Ball named Dairang, whatever that means, and the Suicune I mentioned earlier named Hydro 2. The only place in the 5 mainline Pokemon games where you can get Mareep and Miltank is the Emerald Safari Zone extension. While the Ampharos maybe could have been bred, the Miltank could not have been caught in a Master Ball. As for Suicune, it can be caught in Fire Red Leaf Green, but only if you start with Charmander. I played Leaf Green using Blastoise, so while it's technically possible that I did another Fire Red Leaf Green playthrough with the trainer named Mike, I have no memory of doing so. In short, these 3 Pokemon don't make sense coming from mainline Pokemon games. And that's because they didn't. They came from Colosseum. Pokemon Colosseum is a spin-off Pokemon game where you steal shadow Pokemon from other people in order to purify them. I have a video where I do a deep dive into the game, but I also talk about it in my longest journey a Pokemon can take video. I know these 3 Pokemon are from Colosseum not only because obtaining them in the main games is wildly less likely, but also because their data all makes sense. All 3 have a ribbon, and shadow Pokemon get a ribbon upon being purified. Ampharos is above the level you snag the Shadow Flaffy at, while Suicune and Miltank are exactly the level you snag them at, and it explains the Master Ball on Miltank. It was being a jerk and I wanted it out of the way. See, I've hated Miltank ever since I was a little child. But side note, if you ever play Colosseum, use your Master Ball in the Metagross, that has the lowest catch rate. While I can't confirm it like I can for the Leaf Green Pokemon, the trainer name being Mike for these former Shadow Pokemon implies that these could be from my first ever playthrough of Colosseum. Although I don't know why I would name the Suicune Hydro 2, so maybe not. Then one final Pokemon of note in this box file, foreshadowing, was a Magneton. It was level 32 and named Polzo, and this Magneton has an ID number not found anywhere else in the box file, and an OT of Michael, all caps. As evidenced by the character names for the Leaf Green Pokemon and Colosseum Pokemon, I tended not to follow the Gen 3 naming convention of having names all caps, except the first time, I think. I can't be 100% certain, but I think there's a high likelihood that I named my character in my first ever playthrough of Ruby, Michael all caps, which is what this Magneton's OT name is. Magneton is found in New Mauville in Ruby version, which means that this Magneton, Polzo, could be the last surviving Pokemon from my first ever Pokemon playthrough, but I can't say for sure yet. It's also found in Fire Red and Leaf Green, and Sapphire, and Emerald, so I need to do more digging. Speaking of Emerald, I also found this ladybug named Mr. Buggy, which is an objectively amazing name. This ladybug is one found in the post-game Safari Zone area of Pokemon Emerald based on its Pokeball, and the original trainer is Crash. I'm less certain about this, but I do have a faint memory of naming one of my characters Crash, and since this ladybug was caught in Emerald and its OT is Crash, this ladybug could be from my first Emerald playthrough, where I maybe named myself Crash. In short, I definitely found Pokemon from my first Leaf Green playthrough, and maybe from my first Ruby and Emerald playthrough. I needed to do more digging to solve those mysteries, but before I could do that, I still had more discoveries to make. You see, all I've discussed so far is the box file that was on the memory card that came with the game. But I have 2 other GameCube memory cards. This white one is one that I bought within the last few years, but this black one is the first one that we ever had. You can imagine my surprise when I booted up the GameCube's menu to see that the only thing on it was another file of Pokemon Box. There was more treasure to be found. I swapped in the card, booted up the game the same way, and found about 2 more boxes total of Pokemon. Immediately I noticed several eggs, which I would definitely be hatching, and as I flipped through box 1, every single Pokemon had the original trainer of Sarah. Remember how I mentioned sometimes my brother and I would replay these games but call ourselves a different character and occasionally play as a girl? Well, Sarah was one of those playthroughs, specifically of Sapphire, because there was a Lunatone that Sarah caught. Now, I don't know whether this was me or my brother. Oh, there's a Rayquaza only being used for HMs. Well, that's pretty lame. I hope it wasn't me, but it probably was since I started with Ruby. I don't know if we'll ever know. The first box was all Sarah Pokemon until I got to this Jumpluff. This mysterious Jumpluff. The OT is all caps Michael, but the ID number doesn't match the Magneton from the other file. It has a ribbon, which could indicate that it's from Colosseum since Skiploom is a shadow Pokemon, but it doesn't match the name or ID of the Suicune, Ampharos, and Miltank. Additionally, you can find Wild Hoppip in Fire Red, Leaf Green, and XD Pokemon Colosseum sequel. Like Magneton, I'll need to remove it from box in order to solve its mystery. I scrolled through the rest of box 1, all of which were Sarah's Pokemon, including a Why Not just named Asshole. This prompted me to message my brother, and well, we think it was him. Box 2 was still mostly Sarah's Pokemon, but it had way more that were not. A Justin Armaldo, which does not match the ID number of his Fire Red Pokemon, so could be from his first Sapphire playthrough. Another box gift False Swipe Swablu hatched in the Sarah game. A Magikarp from My Leaf Green. A different ID Justin, Swablu, and Ariados, which are former Shadow Pokemon from one of his Colosseum playthroughs, based on their levels and ribbons. A Duking Metacham, which is an in-game trade Pokemon as a Metatite from Pokemon XD, a Trapinch belonging to Crash, another potential Pokemon from my first Emerald playthrough, a Daryl Delcatty named Skittit, terrible name, which is an in-game trade from Ruby and Sapphire, and to my shock, a Mew. I'll talk more about the Mew in a minute, but real quick, let me cover the Pokemon in box 3. There were only 9. 1 was an egg, 6 were Sarah Pokemon, 1 was a Politoed from My Leaf Green, and 1 was a Roselia with the OT Mike, but not matching the ID number for Leaf Green or Colosseum. And Roselia is not catchable in Colosseum anyways. So with all the Pokemon discovered, I have 4 mysteries to solve. The origin of Polzo the Michael Magneton, the origin of the different Michael Jumpluff, the origin of the Mike Roselia, and what is this freaking Mew? Let's dive into the Mew first. Its OT is NYC, and its ID number is 01234. Clearly not randomly generated, so it must be an event Pokemon. But I don't remember going to any events in Gen 3, so could I have gotten it in a trade? The first thing I did was check Cerebi and Bulbapedia's event databases, but no Mew like this appeared. So I took to Google searching 01234 NYC Mew, and oddly enough, I got results. Across Game FAQs, Smogon, PokeBeach, and Twitter, other people were asking about this exact same Mew. Some got answers saying it was hacked since it's not in the event databases. But if it's not legitimate, why do random people across the internet have the same one? Then I thought about it for a bit, and I remembered. A Game Shark. Back in the old days, if we wanted to hack a game, we used an action replay or a Game Shark. Things you could just buy at the store and inputted codes that hacked the game. Walk through walls, stealing Pokemon, whatever. Many people lost Pokemon to corrupted save files, but one thing they could successfully do was generate Pokemon. So I did a bit more digging, and I found this video. In November of 2009, Quake's GameSpot made a video demonstrating how to use a cheat code in a ROM to generate a Mew with the OT NYC and the ID of 01234. The codes used in emulators today are almost always the same as codes used in physical Action Replay or Game Sharks back in the day. So that means either me or my brother, along with several others on the internet, put probably this same code into one of these devices and generated this Mew. So unfortunately, the Mew is not legitimate. But now for the other three: Polzo the Magneton, the Jumpluff, and the Roselia. The first thing I did was open Pokemon Home on my phone and search via the OT filter, a convenient feature where it will list all the OTs for Pokemon in your home and include the ID number. Simply clicking one brings up all the Pokemon from that OT. I looked for any that matched Polzo the Magneton or the Jumpluff and didn't find any. But to my shock, I did find one for Roselia. It was just one Pokemon, a Kingdra named Roy. Oddly, it says it was met on July 21st, 2014, which didn't make sense, but then I realized that was the date it was moved into Pokemon Bank. My shiny Pharaoh has the same date. This told me something, but not enough. To learn more, I needed to remove these Pokemon from box. I connected my Sapphire, grabbed Polzo the Magneton, and I can't withdraw it. It turns out that box has certain requirements for withdrawing a Pokemon that a specific save file did not deposit. The requirements vary from game to game, but all of them require you to have registered 100 Pokemon in your Pokedex, which I had not done for any of my games. Now, I could have just caught about 25 more Pokemon on my Sapphire, but I opted to meet those requirements with Emerald. I was right before the league anyways, and since it was the last Gen 3 mainline game, I figured it could give me the most information about caught locations and so forth. So I began that process in Emerald, getting through the Victory Road, fighting the League, mainly using Bellydrum Hariyama, entering the Hall of Fame, and got up to 100 Pokemon owned. This took a while. But the Johto expansion of the Safari Zone helped me speed up the process. After a few hours, that was complete, and I tried again to withdraw Polzo the Magneton, and success! I could bring it into my Emerald file. So I brought in Magneton plus several other Pokemon, and then swapped box files and brought in Jumpluff, Roselia, a few other Pokemon, and all of the eggs. I then opened up Emerald and checked Polzo's summary, excited to see that its obtained location was in a trade. Well, that's a bummer. I thought it would give me more detailed location info. But then I scrolled to the next Pokemon, Datto the Unknown, and it did give me location info. Extremely specific info. It said the specific Lip 2 chamber. Why didn't Polzo have that info? I kept scrolling and saw that the Roselia was met at Route 117, where Roselia is normally found, which unfortunately didn't tell me much about which game it came from. Jumpluff was met at level 5 on Route 104, a route where it is not found in the wild, meaning it was hatched from an egg. Whatever that Michael save file was, it seems I somehow ended up with a Hoppip egg, and then hatched it, and evolved it all the way to Jumpluff, probably going through the Pokemon League to do so because it had a Hoenn Champion ribbon. But I was still confused about Polzo. Why did it not have location info? But then, I looked at some of the other Pokemon I brought into Emerald, and I figured out why. I had also brought in the former Shadow Pokemon I found, and like Magneton, they all said obtained in a trade. I checked Polzo's ribbons, and lo and behold, it had a purified Shadow Pokemon ribbon. To my shock, Polzo didn't come from Ruby or Sapphire, Fire Red or Leaf Green or Emerald. It came from XD. There is a Shadow Magneton available in XD that has the same moves and around the same level as Polzo the Magneton. The name was all caps, Michael, because that's the default name for the XD protagonist. So I just clicked that instead of clicking new name because I thought it was cool that my name was the default. So Polzo the Magneton is not from my first Ruby playthrough, but it seems to be from my first XD playthrough, which is still pretty darn cool. As for the eggs, almost every single one was a Trico, which made sense considering the several level 5 Tricos already in the box file. But the final egg, one described as obtained at the nice place, was a Zigzagoon that knows extreme speed. This is actually the second box gift egg Pokemon, obtained when depositing at least 100 Pokemon into the box. But as for Jumpluff and Roselia, I still couldn't be completely sure where they came from. I eventually remembered that Roselia was not catchable in Emerald, so it, along with Roy the Kingdra, had to be from Ruby or Sapphire. Jumpluff was harder to tell though, but I thought Emerald was more likely. Ruby and Sapphire did not have the National Pokedex, so I didn't really see why I would evolve a Hoppip all the way up into a Jumpluff in a game where I wouldn't get any dex entries for it. It became clear that while I knew these two Pokemon were created in Gen 3 Hoenn games, I couldn't know which games specifically using official methods, so their mystery would remain unsolved. Or would it? You see, by using less than sanctioned methods, I can figure out which precise game these Pokemon were created in. I just have to get them onto my Switch. So I grabbed Jumpluff and Roselia, plus Datto the Unknown, Polzo the Magneton, Thundro the Ampharos, and Freezy the Articuno, and migrated them to Pal Park in Platinum. After catching them there, I used the Transporter Lab in my Black 2 to move them to Gen 5. Then using Poké Transporter on the 3DS, I got them into Pokemon Bank, then moved them from Bank to Home. Once on Home, I moved them to my Brilliant Diamond. I know, gross, but it's the only Switch game that both of them can go into. And traded them to a different Switch that is, well, different, and is one that allowed me to look more deeply into the save data. So I went through that process and looked at the info on Roselia, and it was from Ruby. And then Jumpluff was also from Ruby. Oh. Huh. Gotta say, didn't predict they would both be from Ruby. Thought I would have only played through Ruby using a Michael variation name one time. Apparently not. But what this does mean is that while both of them are not from my first Ruby playthrough, one of them probably is. I don't know which one, and I now have no way to tell because I do not remember how exactly I formatted my name in my first playthrough of Ruby. So in the end, while I can't say with certainty that I have this specific Pokemon from my first ever Pokemon playthrough, I probably have one or two, and I definitely have a bunch of Pokemon from my second. So in the end, I'm pretty happy with how this all turned out. Don't forget to pick up some Team Sky gear or the cool new Mighty Desk Mat at MandJTVmerch.com, and thank you so much for watching. With an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you want to help support me in the same way, the link's in the description below. But that is all I have for now. So until next time, big fans, gotta catch them all.